On July 7, 2012, in the picturesque and peaceful Central Florida suburb of Winter Park, a tragic event occurred that rocked the affluent community. The lives of two couples, Kyle and Lisa Thompson and Mike and Sarah Roberts, became intertwined in unexpected ways, leading to obsession, deceit, and ultimately death. Kyle Thompson, 36, a well-respected local artist known for his amiable personality, was married to Lisa, 34, an art instructor at a local college. Mike Roberts, 37, a prosperous investment consultant, and his wife, Sarah, 33, a high school teacher, were close friends of the Thompsons. But these two couples shared more than just friendship. They were swingers, couples who engage in a sexual arrangement that involves swapping partners. Initially, this unconventional lifestyle, also known as wife swapping, brought excitement and novelty to their rather drab suburban lives. However, beneath the surface, the arrangement would create a dangerous mix of jealousy, obsession, and hatred. Over time, Kyle's interest in Sarah evolved into an overwhelming obsession, causing tension in his relationship with Lisa. When Sarah became alarmed by the magnitude of Kyle's growing obsession with her, she decided to end the arrangement. This decision set off a chain of tragic events that eventually led to murder. The Thompsons, who had been college sweethearts, had been happily married for a decade. To their friends and family, they appeared to be the perfect couple, seemingly happy and deeply in love. They resided in a lovely home on Palm Street, which included a studio where Kyle created his art, surrounded by a meticulously maintained garden that Lisa took pride in. The Roberts, who had moved to Winter Park 2 years after the Thompsons, quickly became an integral part of the neighborhood. Mike Roberts, known for his outgoing nature, and Sarah, with her ever-ready smile and captivating charm, added a vibrant dynamic to the community. The two couples met at a community 4th of July picnic in 2009 and quickly struck up a friendship. Over time, they would go on outings together, enjoying movies, the theater, and dinners, both outside and in each other's homes. One evening in late 2009, the idea of partners swapping arose during a dinner gathering at the Thompsons' house. After dinner, the couples enjoyed drinks together. After a few rounds of drinks, the topic of swinging came up, which sparked a lively conversation that eventually led to a mutual agreement among the couples. That evening, the couple swapped partners with Kyle and Sarah spending the night together in the Thompsons' house, while Mike and Lisa went back to spend the night together at the Robert home. Initially, the experience brought a fresh sense of thrill and rejuvenation to both of their marriages. The new arrangement became an occasional part of their weekends as Kyle and Lisa and Mike and Sarah excitedly explore their sexualities with their new partners. However, as time passed, subtle shifts slowly became evident in the relationships between the four, especially in Kyle's behavior. His growing fixation with Sarah, unnoticed by the others at first, quickly escalated into a troubling and all-consuming obsession, which began to take over his thoughts and actions. Eventually, Lisa Thompson began to become concerned about her husband's growing interest in Sarah. She expressed her concerns to her husband. Yet despite his attempts to dismiss Lisa's concerns as mere jealousy, Kyle's preoccupation with Sarah became increasingly evident. He began to neglect his work, spending less and less time in his art studio, and finding more ways to be close to Sarah. Kyle's growing interest in Sarah caused tensions in his relationship with Lisa, who became jealous of Sarah's newfound hold over her husband. The once novel and exciting arrangement began to spiral out of control, which would eventually affect everyone involved in ways none of them could never have imagined. Lisa, by now fully sensing that something had gone wrong in her relationship with her husband, started to observe Kyle more closely. Her suspicions heightened when she noticed his prolonged gazes at Sarah during gatherings, indicating a growing fixation. Sarah, initially flattered by the attention and oblivious to Kyle's obsession, soon became uncomfortable with Kyle's increasingly possessive behavior. She confided in Mike about her concerns, but he dismissed them, attributing Kyle's actions to mere displays of interest and affection. But Sarah's unease with Kyle would not go away. Her suspicions peaked during a weekend retreat the two couples took together to a resort in the Florida Keys in March 2012, where Kyle's obsession became more pronounced. He isolated Sarah, showing a preference for her company over others. One evening by the fire on the beach, Kyle made a startling remark about wanting to abandon everything to start a new life with Sarah, causing her distress. Lisa, overhearing the conversation, confronted Kyle, who downplayed his remarks, which only frustrated her further and added to her growing jealousy. As Kyle's behavior became more erratic, He would persistently seek Sarah out beyond the couple's agreed-upon arranged meetings. Sarah became fearful and eventually decided to end the couple's wife-swapping arrangement in the hopes of protecting her marriage with Mike and their friendship with the Thompsons. But things were not to go the way that Sarah had hoped. In a tense encounter at the Roberts' home while Mike was away, Kyle expressed his feelings to Sarah, envisioning a future together. Sarah firmly rejected his advances and asserted that she wanted out of their arrangement. And despite Kyle's pleas and his attempts to persuade her otherwise, Sarah stood her ground. In the aftermath, Sarah avoided Kyle, hoping that he would eventually realize the inappropriateness of his actions. Lisa, meanwhile, increasingly disturbed by his feelings for Sarah, attempted to reason with him to back off from his obsessive behavior. But it was all to no avail. Kyle's obsession with Sarah only deepened. He began to appear at the school where Sarah worked, leading to unwelcome advances which only escalated the tension between the two. One afternoon, as Sarah was walking back to her home from work through their neighborhood, Kyle confronted her. Sarah reiterated her determination to end their arrangement and repeated her concerns about the inappropriateness of Kyle's obsessive behavior. However, Sarah's firm stance only caused Kyle to become more desperate, which culminated in accusations of betrayal and anger towards her outside while tending her garden. Lisa overheard the argument and felt a surge of panic. She realized that she would have to intervene before the situation had spiraled further out of control. Lisa decided to approach the pair, her voice piercing as she called out to Kyle. The sudden presence of Lisa seemed to jolt Kyle out of his anger, which gave Sarah the opportunity to walk away, wanting only to separate herself from Kyle. Now alone with her husband, Lisa endeavored to calm him, offering reassurance that they could work together to work everything out between them. However, inwardly, she was deeply disturbed as her jealousy and rage against Sarah began to well within her. She knew that their lives had been irreversibly altered and ever loyal to her husband. She blamed Sarah. The couple's wife-swapping relationship had reached an irreversible breaking point due to Kyle's obsession with Sarah, and Lisa began to blame Sarah's and her decision to terminate the arrangement as the precipitating cause, setting off a chain of events that could not be undone. As the dust settled, Kyle's altercation with Sarah had left Kyle in a state of utter confusion and turmoil, with Sarah's resolute rejection and Lisa's unexpected intervention shaking him to his core. Returning home that night, Kyle's mind was consumed by a tumult of anger, betrayal, and desperation. Perceiving the storm brewing within him, Lisa attempted to pacify his troubled thoughts. Yet in the days that followed, Kyle remained inconsolable. In the days that followed, Kyle became increasingly erratic, swinging between anger and depression as he fixated on Sarah's rejection and her perceived betrayal of him. Lisa, unable to reach him, grappled with mounting frustration and fear as she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy in their relationship while her anger towards Sarah increased. Meanwhile, Sarah, resolute in moving forward, avoided Kyle altogether while she prioritized her work and her relationship with Mike in order to forge ahead. She refrained from disclosing the full extent of Kyle's obsession to Mike, who was still completely oblivious to the situation, apprehensive of the fallout that might occur if Mike were to know. But Sarah's hopes for a peaceful resolution to the arrangement were never to be realized. In an unsettling turn of events, a few days later, Kyle awaited Sarah outside of her house as she left for work, sparking another tense encounter. By this time, Sarah had grown cold towards Kyle's continued pleas and insistence, firmly maintaining her boundaries. As his pleas became increasingly louder and grew more emotional, Kyle's attempt to detain Sarah eventually drew the attention of a neighbor, who intervened and threatened to call the police. With this, Kyle retreated. Badly shaken by this incident, Sarah sought out Lisa to ask for her help and guidance. But Lisa, now driven by jealousy and resentment towards her newly perceived rival, rebuffed all of Sarah's attempts at cooperation. By the evening of July 7, 2012, Kyle Thompson became more and more anxious about the situation. He began to drink heavily. His thoughts turned ominous, and he became convinced that suicide was the only solution to his inner turmoil. Emotionally distraught and in a drunken stupor, he ventured into his and his wife Lisa's bedroom. There he found Lisa, who convinced him instead that Sarah was the problem. Together, the two formulated a plan to rid themselves of Sarah, setting the stage for a dark alliance born out of necessity and dread. That very night, breaking into the Roberts' house while Mike was away on a business trip, Kyle confronted Sarah in her sleep and stabbed her to death. Horrified by the brutality of his crime, Kyle fled the scene. Returning home in a distressed state, once the deed was done, Lisa swiftly took charge of the situation. She guided Kyle to their bathroom and instructed him to remove his clothes and cleanse himself of the blood. The urgency of their predicament consumed her thoughts, as she knew they had to act quickly to cover up the crime and safeguard their hidden life. As Kyle showered the blood off of him, Lisa gathered his clothes and put them in a garbage bag. She carefully scrubbed the floor where he had walked, eradicating any trace of the gruesome act. Once Kyle was cleansed, she sat down and together, the two went over every detail of the incident. Lisa devised a plan. They needed to establish an alibi and dispose of any evidence linking them to the crime. She reached out to a trusted family member, her sister, Ava, fabricating a story that Kyle had been in her company throughout the evening and solidifying their alibi. Then she drove to a secluded location outside of town where she incinerated Kyle's blood-stained clothes and buried the murder weapon, praying that this would destroy any remaining evidence of the crime. The murder of Sarah Roberts remained undiscovered until the morning of Monday, July 9, 2012, when Mike Roberts returned home from his business trip. Horrified, he called 911 and police, led by Detective Aaron Jenkins, were quickly dispatched to the scene. What they found was a gruesome scene. Sarah had been stabbed 26 times, murdered while sleeping in her own bed. As the police began to gather evidence, they interrogated everyone in the neighborhood, including the Thompsons. Lisa's meticulously crafted alibi withstood scrutiny, and Kyle, though visibly distressed, managed to evade suspicion. Despite their initial success in evading authorities, the psychological burden of the murder weighed heavily on both Kyle and Lisa. Kyle, the more emotionally unstable and fragile of the two, grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were closing in on him. He distanced himself from friends and colleagues, isolating himself in a web of fear and regret. Lisa, though outwardly composed, also felt the strain of their secret weighing upon her. She became hypervigilant, scrutinizing every interaction and behavior for signs of suspicion from those around them. The weeks following Sarah Roberts' murder blurred into a constant state of tension and deception for the Thompsons. Lisa assumed the role of stabilizer, managing Kyle's growing paranoia while ensuring that their public facade remained intact. She was one of the first people to comfort Mike on his loss, while at the same time carefully monitoring the news for any updates on the investigation. However, Lisa knew that maintaining their cover required more than just an alibi. They needed to construct a narrative that would divert attention away from Kyle. She suggested to Kyle that he should appear more distraught over Sarah's death, aligning with the community's grief and deflecting suspicion at social gatherings and community meetings. Kyle, by now completely under the control of his wife, dutifully played the part of the grieving friend, speaking of Sarah with a mixture of fondness and sorrow, his eyes often welling up with tears. Mike Roberts, devastated by the loss and desperate for answers, seemed to appreciate Kyle's empathy, oblivious to his friend's involvement in his wife's demise. But despite Lisa's careful instructions, Kyle's fragile mental state deteriorated further, his guilt manifesting in nightmares and hallucinations. He turned to heavy drinking as a means of temporary escape, but it provided no solace, only exacerbating his turmoil. Fearing that Kyle might confess in a drunken stupor, Lisa kept a constant vigil over him, often staying up late to ensure he didn't leave the house. One evening, as Kyle slumped over a glass of whiskey, he broke down and confessed to Lisa that he could no longer bear the guilt and needed to come clean. Panicked, Lisa tried to calm him, desperate to maintain their composure. She proposed they take a short trip out of town, seeking refuge in a secluded cabin located deep in the mountains of North Georgia. The change of scenery was intended to help Kyle find some semblance of peace. The isolation offered them a temporary respite, allowing them to strategize their next moves without the constant pressure of the investigation hanging over them. During their time at the cabin, Lisa continued to coach her husband, emphasizing the importance of secrecy and instructing him on how to handle police questioning and public interactions, drilling him constantly until he could respond without hesitation. Lisa's unwavering determination to protect her husband and avoid imprisonment fueled her relentless drive to keep their story consistent. Upon returning to Winter Park 2 weeks later, the Thompsons resumed their lives with a renewed sense of purpose. Though still haunted by his actions, Kyle managed to present a more composed demeanor. Lisa continued to carefully stage manage their interactions with her friends and co-workers in the community, ensuring that they remained above suspicion. However, the cracks in their facade began to show. Friends and neighbors noticed Kyle's increased drinking, shaking hands, and erratic behavior, and soon whispers of his possible involvement in Sarah's death began to surface. Once she heard the rumors, Lisa, always alert and watchful, worked tirelessly to suppress them. However, as the police investigation continued under the watchful eye of Detective Aaron Jenkins, new evidence began to surface, which cast doubt on Kyle's carefully crafted alibi, and which threatened to destroy the Thompsons' world. Detective Jenkins conducted separate follow-up interviews with Lisa and Kyle, meticulously noting any inconsistencies in their stories. Lisa's carefully crafted alibi held up under scrutiny, and despite his sometime erratic behavior, Kyle's emotional state appeared genuine, consistent with that of a grieving friend. However, Jenkins' intuition told him that there was more to the story. As the weeks passed, additional evidence emerged, including forensic analysis of Sarah's phone records. These records revealed a series of desperate text messages from Kyle, which demonstrated his unhealthy obsession with Sarah. Following this discovery, Jenkins brought Kyle in for further questioning, pressing him on the inconsistencies in his alibi and the nature of his relationship with Sarah. Despite Kyle's struggle to maintain his composure and stick to the story Lisa had coached him on, his nervousness and evasive answers only heightened the detective's suspicions. The turning point in the investigation came when a neighbor came forward with crucial information. Robert Hensley, 79, was an elderly neighbor of the Roberts who lived across the street. He had been the one who had been disturbed by Kyle's confrontation with Sarah outside of her house, who threatened to call the police. In addition, he had also witnessed Kyle walking near the Johnsons' house on the night of the murder. This testimony, combined with the forensic evidence and Kyle's erratic behavior, was enough of police to obtain a search warrant for the Thompsons' home. During the search, traces of Sarah's blood, which had seeped into the floorboards, were discovered, despite Lisa's thorough cleaning. This damning evidence, coupled with witness testimony and phone records, painted a clear picture of Kyle's guilt. The net was closing in on the Thompsons, and Lisa realized that their carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. As the evidence against Kyle mounted, Detective Jenkins prepared to make his move. He brought Kyle in for another round of questioning, adopting a different approach. He presented all the evidence they had gathered, including the phone records, witness testimonies, and forensic findings. Overwhelmed and cornered, Kyle began to crack under the pressure. Jenkins then pressed harder, suggesting that if Kyle confessed, he might receive a more lenient sentence. Unable to bear the weight of his guilt and the relentless questioning, Kyle finally broke down and confessed to killing Sarah. He then described in detail his obsession with Sarah, his confrontations with her, and the fateful night that led to her murder. However, in his confession, Kyle also implicated Lisa, revealing her role in covering up the crime. He described how she had helped him clean up, dispose of evidence, and craft an alibi. Sensing an opportunity to get the full story, Jenkins had Lisa brought in for questioning as well. Initially denying any involvement, once the full extent of Kyle's confession was revealed, Lisa soon realized that there was no way out. Her carefully constructed lies had unraveled. She admitted to helping Kyle, explaining that she had done so out of a misguided sense of loyalty and fear of losing everything they had built. In November 2012, the trial of Kyle and Lisa Thompson began in a crowded courtroom in the Orange County Courthouse in Orlando, Florida. Kyle Thompson, once a successful artist and well-regarded member of the community, was charged with first-degree murder, while his wife Lisa faced charges of accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. Both pleaded guilty to their respective charges. Due to his full confession, which also implicated Lisa, Kyle avoided the death penalty and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Lisa received a lighter sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison with a possibility of parole after 10. The aftermath of the trial found the close-knit community of Winter Park struggling to heal from the scars left by the murder. Mike Roberts, left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, found some solace in the justice served, but continued to mourn the loss of his beloved wife. Deeply regretting the wife-swapping arrangement he had once been an enthusiastic supporter of, he moved out of the area, determined to start anew. Eventually, he resettled in Colorado, where he remarried. Kyle and Lisa Thompson began their new life in prison. Called being incarcerated at the Florida State Prison at Rayford, Florida, while Lisa was sent to serve her sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution north of Ocala. In 2022, Lisa became eligible for parole, but was denied. She is expected to be released from prison by 2037. The tragic case of Sarah Roberts is a sad reminder of the dangers of obsession and the fragility of life and love. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.